I want you to picture a small English village, tucked away among gentle hills and winding roads. The air is thick with fog in the early mornings, leaving a faint sheen of dew on every blade of grass. Lanterns flicker at night, revealing cobblestone paths where tavern-goers stumble home after an evening's drink. In this sleepy place, hidden beneath the charm and rustic beauty, lies a story so unnerving, so wrapped in mystery, that folks still talk about it centuries later. It's the story of one man, his cursed chair, and the strange, eerie fate that befell every poor soul who dared to sit upon it. Today, we dig into the legend of Thomas Busby and his infamous chair. Thomas Busby was not the kind of man people remembered for kindness or generosity. He was rough around the edges from the start, someone who preferred the dark corners of a tavern to the bright light of day. No one knows for sure how he ended up in North Yorkshire, but by the late 1600s, he had settled near a small village called Kirby Whiskey, not far from the market town of Thirsk. Life back then was harsh, especially for those without money or social standing. Opportunities were few, and the law didn't protect those on the fringes. Yet, he did find some measure of stability when he married a woman named Elizabeth. She was quiet and gentle, and maybe she saw something in Thomas that no one else could. Unfortunately, Elizabeth came with her own baggage. Her father, Daniel Awety. Daniel owned a small farm and also had a bit of a shady reputation. Rumor around town was that Daniel had his fingers in all sorts of questionable dealings. He was possibly engaged in coin counterfeiting, though nothing was ever proven outright. People just whispered about it in hushed tones whenever he came into the local tavern or general store. Nevertheless, he seemed better off than most, owning a plot of land and a modest house. But with Daniel's dark undertones and Thomas's bristling temper, you can imagine how things might turn ugly one day. Over time, Thomas and Daniel became business partners in ways that raised eyebrows. They spent long evenings in the back room of the local pub, speaking in low voices, exchanging sealed packages. Nobody quite knew what they were up to, but speculation abounded. It wasn't a secret that Thomas liked a drink or two, or three. He'd become belligerent when drunk, talking loudly about how no one should ever cross him. By the time he stumbled out of the tavern, he'd be muttering threats under his breath to imaginary foes.
And action.
Then it happened. The argument that would change everything. One evening, Daniel visited Thomas and Elizabeth, supposedly to discuss some sort of deal. No one knows the exact details, but the talk got heated, voices were raised, and insults flew like arrows in the small house. The final straw was something to do with Elizabeth. Or perhaps it was about money or ownership of the farm. Whatever the truth, that night ended with Thomas Busby storming off, causing his father-in-law to the depths of the underworld. By the next morning, Daniel Awety was found dead. His body lay on the side of a lonely road near the house, battered beyond recognition. The entire village buzzed with the horrific news. To no one's surprise, the authorities quickly arrested Thomas Busby. Some say they found him hiding, trembling like a leaf, or that he was so drunk he could barely protest. A murder investigation in those days was nothing like the procedure we're used to now. It didn't take them long to convict him. Evidence was scant, but Thomas's reputation and the fact he had threatened Daniel numerous times was enough. The court decided he was guilty of murder. Sentencing in the early 1700s was swift and harsh. Thomas Busby was to be hanged for his crime. Back then, public hangings were gruesome community events. People gathered from far and wide as if it were a festival, though the entertainment was grim. Vendors sold ale, food stands popped up, and children scampered around in a strange mix of curiosity and horror. Thomas, on the other hand, had only a few days to make his final peace with the world. Whatever was left of his soul weighed heavily as he sat in a jail cell, counting down the hours. The day of the hanging arrived. Guards marched Thomas through the gathered crowd. He wore a tattered shirt and breeches, a robe draped around his shoulders, and terror in his eyes. The folks who had once seen him swagger into the tavern with a bravado-laden smirk now watched him shuffle, head bowed. But right before the noose was placed around his neck, he made a final request. In those days, it was customary to allow a condemned man one last wish, often a final meal or a prayer with a priest. Busby didn't want a fancy meal or a special drink. He simply wanted to stop by his favorite tavern for a moment, to have one last sip of ale while sitting in his beloved chair. Why that chair meant so much is open to speculation. Some say it was where he finalized crooked deals. Others claim it was where he felt most at ease, as if the chair's rickety arms enclosed him in a protective embrace. Nonetheless, the authorities obliged. Surrounded by guards, he stepped into the dark, smoky tavern he knew so well. Patrons hushed. He gazed around at all the frightened faces, at the familiar flickering candles and the sticky wood floors. Then he sat himself down in his cherished wooden chair for one final drink. One final moment of comfort before facing the gallows. With the last sip of ale still on his lips, Thomas rose, placed a hand on the chair's back, and uttered his famous curse. In a ragged, hate-filled voice, he proclaimed that anyone who dared to sit in his chair would meet a sudden and violent death. The curse spilled out like venom. People in the tavern recoiled, and with that, the guards marched him away. Moments later, Thomas Busby swung from the gallows, ending his life, but unleashing a legend that would grow more powerful with each passing year. Now many stories would end there with the criminal's last breath, but not this one. In the days following Busby's execution, the chair remained in the tavern, initially just a wooden piece of furniture in a corner. Patrons avoided it at first out of respect, or maybe fear. Then, curiosity began to poke at them. Was this curse real, or was it just the drunken rambling of a condemned man? A few bold souls, full of ale and bravado, decided to test their luck. They'd swagger over to the chair, smirk at their companions, and plop down in it with mock grandiosity, as if to say, "Look at me, I don't believe in ghost stories." Often, they did it in the late hours of the night, fueled by liquid courage. And wouldn't you know it, some of them never made it home. One man, they said, died in a freak accident on the road that very night. Another collapsed from a heart attack within hours of sitting in the chair. At first, folks tried to chalk it up to coincidence. But as the body count rose, fear took hold. The chair's reputation spread through the village like wildfire. Superstition reigned in those times. People truly believed in curses and spirits, and it seemed that Busby's final words had taken on a life of their own. Over the following decades, the legends only grew more sinister. Some told of a young man returning from war who sat in the chair to boast of his bravery. Within days, he was found sprawled in a nearby ditch, lifeless. Another tale involved two workers renovating the pub after hours. They used the chair as a makeshift seat. By morning, scaffolding had collapsed inexplicably, killing them both. Folks whispered that the chair was hungry, as if it demanded a price for every man foolish enough to rest upon its cursed seat. Eventually, the tavern owner grew so disturbed by the tragedies that he banished the chair to the cellar. But even that didn't quell the stories. People would come from distant villages, curious travelers lured by the dark tale. They'd bribe employees for a secret peek at the infamous chair, hoping to see if it radiated some kind of malevolent energy. Some claimed to feel an icy chill upon touching its worn armrests. Others said they heard faint whispers urging them to sit down, as though Thomas Busby himself beckoned from the spirit realm. As time marched on, the world changed around that tiny village. The Industrial Revolution came and went. Wars raged in Europe, changing landscapes and politics. But the Busby chair remained, standing defiant against the tides of progress. Stories continued, each retelling warping and twisting the facts a little more, until the line between truth and myth blurred completely. One day in the 20th century, after a series of mysterious deaths, the tavern's new owner decided he'd had enough. He worried that the chair was bad for business, or at least for his peace of mind. It had become a spectacle, attracting thrill seekers who might not realize they were putting themselves at risk. Whether he believed in the curse or not, he felt the weight of the locals' dread. So, he donated the chair to a local museum in Thirsk. But even in the museum, fear persisted. Staff noticed visitors were intrigued by the chair, some even daring each other to touch it or sit in it when no one was looking. The museum finally took drastic action. They hung the chair from the ceiling by ropes, ensuring that no one could ever sit on it again. Even to this day, if you go to that museum, you might see a worn wooden chair suspended out of reach. A plaque might tell you the tale of Thomas Busby and warn you of the consequences that once followed anyone foolish enough to tempt fate. Now that should be the end of the story, right? The chair is out of commission, locked away where it can't claim any more victims. But here's the thing about curses. They don't always need physical contact to wreak havoc. Some modern-day visitors have reported feeling uneasy just being near the chair. A few claim to have seen shadowy figures in their peripheral vision, dancing just beyond the edge of the dim museum lights. Others say they've captured strange orbs or streaks of light in photographs taken near the chair's display. Coincidence or curse? No one can say for sure. Locals still talk about the chair in hushed whispers. They'll tell you about a time, not so long ago, when a journalist scoffed at the curse and tried to reach up and touch the seat. Legend says his car veered off the road the very next week. Although he survived, he swore he'd never again mock Busby's final words. It's a reminder that some mysteries simply shouldn't be trifled with. People who consider themselves skeptics argue that it's all folklore, a series of unfortunate coincidences spun into a supernatural web. After all, accidents happen, especially in a time when roads were dark and treacherous. Medical care was primitive, and manual labor was dangerous. They see the story of Thomas Busby as just another cautionary tale, a way for people to cope with the everyday risk of life in older times. Then there are those who stand firmly in the realm of belief. They'll tell you they can sense the chair's aura. They'll recount tales of men and women who laughed at the curse, only to meet an untimely end. They point to the museum's decision to hang the chair out of reach as undeniable proof that the owners themselves believe in its power, or at least fear public backlash if another tragedy occurred. Whatever side you land on, you have to admit there's something incredibly haunting about an old wooden chair that's rumored to bring death to anyone who dares to sit on it. The chair has become a character in its own right, continuing Thomas Busby's legacy long after his last breath left his body. So, what really happened that night of the murder? Was Busby truly the culprit, or was he framed? Did Daniel Awiti discover something about Thomas's illegal dealings and threaten to turn him in? Or maybe Busby just snapped in a drunken rage. The official records are murky, and the passing centuries haven't helped. And that's the allure of legends like this. They thrive on unanswered questions. Still, the bigger mystery might be this. Why did that final, desperate curse hold such power? Could it be that the intense emotion in those last words somehow left an imprint on the chair? Or was the fear of the curse enough to make people believe, and therefore fulfill the prophecy through sheer terror and superstition? The human mind is a powerful tool, especially when it comes to fear. When you're told that sitting in a particular chair will kill you, your heart beats faster, your senses heighten, and every little misfortune afterwards feels like part of a dark cosmic plan. And yet, curiosity lingers. Even if you walked into that tavern today, if it were still standing in its original form, and saw that chair in the corner, would you be tempted? Could you resist trying to prove you're braver than the legends say you should be? Many folks would say, I don't believe in curses, but their legs would quiver before actually taking a seat. It's human nature to be fascinated by the unknown, to test our limits in the face of something that defies rational explanation. And it's why the Busby chair has never faded into obscurity, even though the man who cursed it died more than 300 years ago. Some nights, if you wander the streets of Thirsk or the neighboring village, you might find yourself drawn to that old museum. You'll stand outside as the moon hangs low in the sky, and maybe you'll hear the faint creak of floorboards inside, as if someone or something is pacing around. You might imagine Thomas Busby's spirit prowling about, restless, watching visitors come and go. The next time you wander into an antique store or a second-hand shop, you might pause before sitting in an old, well-worn chair. You'll remember Thomas Busby and how an ordinary piece of furniture became an object of dread. You might even smile nervously and step away, wondering just what stories that chair could tell. Maybe none at all. Or maybe a story that could haunt you for the rest of your life. This is the allure of mysteries like Busby's. That is the lingering shadow cast by Thomas Busby, a man whose rage spawned a legend, and whose final words still echo through the centuries, etched into the worn arms of a chair that no living person dares to occupy. If you enjoyed unraveling the eerie tale of Thomas Busby's chair and want more chilling mysteries, spine-tingling ghost stories, and baffling true crime accounts, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have so many more tales ready to keep you awake at night. Your next great mystery is just a click away. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the macabre legend of Thomas Busby. Until next time, remember, some chairs are just chairs, until someone curses them with their dying breath. So stay curious, but tread carefully. And above all, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that blur the line between the natural and the supernatural.